Hello, everyone. Tonight's episode follows a very interesting topic. At the same time, at the end of it, I will open it up to some sort of Q&A if there's any sort of questions relevant to the topic I want to, in some sense, be shown in the open. Anyways, the title is Axis of All Stories. And currently, the human condition Okay. The human condition, we see people are living. We see various forms of people, various sorts of intelligence alive. These people, their lives have a sort of value, and their values center around a sense of self. You can say the first axis for individual human activity is the sense of self. What that means is when you look at people, as much as they're being governed and their intelligence is being dictated based on their external condition, what kind of a physical being they are, their whole physicality revolves around their subjective conclusions upon the world they see. And their subjective conclusions, pretty much the sense of self of the person, it's upon an axis. The axis of the sense of self is a moment of attributeless attention. This moment of attributeless attention cannot be owned. It is not something that is your state, and at the same time it is not something that is only the state of the world. It's like a unique symbiosis of human consciousness with just existence's vast movement. Now, some parts of nature, they do become conscious. They do become conscious, and the moment they do, they find themselves as a sort of particle in a field. Eventually the particle will become the field. So it's like, rather than you experiencing you're a person in a world, the experience evolves to a position where it's like you're the world experiencing a person. When it comes to that state, something very unique happens. The person can no longer identify themselves conceptually, as if a deeper access to reality has been found. Now the true access, something I should have said from the beginning, is that all human beings, we are dictated. It's like the axis of the planet is unavoidable in some sense, because the planet is the stage where we're allowed to be in. The axis of the stage is very crucial. What that means is, underneath all our identities and personalities and whoever we think we are, the world is here. Simply, nature is present. In the ancient Sufi practices, the dervish, in some sense, was advised not to pursue only the intellect, not to use the method of the intellect for discovering the true nature of the world. The reason was because the intellect could take the person to a sort of caged notion of the world, where it's as if, like, the Sufis would say something funny. They'd say, it's kind of like whipping a dead donkey to go faster. It's as if you have made the world lifeless and cutting it up into pieces and then trying to see what the world actually is. I mean, on some level, the explorations are useful, or they contribute to the civilization. On another level, we never understand life if we're constantly breaking it to see what it's made of. Sometimes when you go to see what something is made of, like if we wanted to take the same approach to atoms, to human beings, it's as if the doctor's like, I'm not convinced, and the doctor has to break up the human body, then to reassemble and to see what the meaning is. What that means is we are in some sense integratively present with the ecosystem. Excuse me. Just checking something about trying to see if the chat is on. Yeah. Okay. It's very fascinating. When we look at objective movements, they seem to be influenced by inner intentions. External movement is inspired by inner intentions. The person is just sitting there, then suddenly a sort of hunger comes, and then their mind remembers they have food somewhere, and then they go. If we consider stories, they are in some sense sort of containers of the world. In some sense, the axis of all stories is suggesting the axis of all worlds, which is suggesting the core central position, like the core, like the palm, like what I said, like the core. The center of every inner reality finds itself in another dimension. What that means is we're sandwiched between two collective ways the world is present. When we go internally, the individual consciousness will revert into a field of intelligence. When you go too externally, you're going to realize either it's an infinite journey or it is, in some sense, the resolution of the separation. I personally feel a human being, they don't own their thoughts. These words that I'm saying right now, I don't believe they can be owned. They are just moments of attention, moments where the attention is kept in various states. We have to look at how we are putting the world on an axis in our experience. When I was younger, I felt my experience was invalid, so in some sense I was left in a situation where I only sought validation from the environment. What that means is because I wanted the world to be in a certain way, anytime anything else came my way, I would in some sense dismiss it or be ignorant of it. Today in society, I don't want to say we are as savage as our ancestors, but we have like there has been a huge civilization process going on. We have become civilized as creatures in this evolutionary scheme, in this evolutionary landscape. From the brutality of the animal, we have come to the calmness of the man, walking gracefully in the park. When you go really far back in history, The axis of the world before language was just an experiential presence. This experiential presence, it's very fascinating. It's kind of like the world is oscillating, kind of going up and down, and it's like its peak is a sort of collective reality. Its trough is an individual reality. And so it's kind of like nature is unconscious, then suddenly a part of nature becomes conscious, then that part of nature which has become conscious realizes the unconscious, eventually emerges into the unconscious as a new sort of consciousness. And trust me, it's this back and forth between collective and individual existence. You see, I always found it fascinating. I always thought, why are gods on this planet? My mind, for the first time when it was introduced to a sort of a concept of polytheism, I was like, why are there so many gods around? And because in ancient Vedic stories, for example, in the Ramayana, there's kind of, not in the I think in the Ramayana too, definitely in the Mahabharata, Rishi, how can I say it? Gods would go visit men. Even in the Mahabharata, gods have children with women, right? In some sense, they have celestially divine children. But in another setting, it was as if the gods, which were on their own eternal abode, would come down to man. And there was this question, and not to man, to certain sages and mystics who were in the mountains. And the reason was, the reason was because the gods had no reason to question their existence. Pretty much heavenly beings had too many offerings and satisfaction to even consider the point of this existence. And lesser inferior beings didn't have the consciousness to ask the question. So humanity, the human existence in ancient texts is seen as a very unique position where the person does not have, it's as if it's like the person perfect balance of reality to discover the nature of existence. Rama, he said that in some sense the purpose of life is to work. In some sense he said that. It's not his principal view, but I'm saying he said it's work. And he said, and people were like, why work? And he said, because in the lesser realms you are working without knowing that you're working, and in the higher realms you don't need to work anymore. And it is only in this human life where the value of the search can be truly attained. In ancient Vedanta and Vedic culture, there were certain people known as seers of thought. They were called rishis. And the seers of thought, at least how my experiences open up to it, were human beings who had transcended their identity, which means they had seen the full birth and death of their ideological self. They had understood the nature. They had understood the nature of how their intelligence animates, how the world opens its eyes and their eyes open the world. The seers of thought, I use a modern term for them. I call them the pilots of consciousness. The pilots of consciousness are those beings who navigate as their whole plane of existence. They are not so shocked by, overwhelmed by the data of the world to have it in some sense chain them. It's as if you have to free your wings, but little do they tell you one wing is made of chaos, the other wing is made of order. And so the mind functions and resides in a state where duality is in some sense the colors of the world. Nothing is ever singular. You cannot have beauty without the ugly. You know, you cannot have the ugly without the beauty, and in some without the beautiful. And when you look at Carl Jung's work, he spoke about archetypes. And when you look at archetypes, you have to ask yourself, what is the value of the archetype? You know, what is the value of a person seeing a sort of uh, deeper implication of an existential position? I honestly have had moments in this life where life had to force me to let go of everything. There has been times on this earth where I have tried to instantaneously, like I remember when I was younger, my ego was ruthless. It's as if my ego was praised in my childhood. I had a very blessed childhood. And because I had a blessed childhood, my mode of thought was that the world owes me, as if why is the world discontinuing its a grace towards me. And so I remember I have gone in states where I have shouted at the sky, and I've gone in states where I felt I was being shouted from the sky. Like somebody would, like, I don't know how to say it, but it's, for me, this life, before I can believe it, humor kinda is like a guardian angel. For me, playfulness and laughter are moments where, in some sense, it's the reflection of the divine. How the creature is manifest as a reflection of the universal sector. An axiom is kind of like, you can say, the first belief. And if you were to ask yourself what you believe in, would you put on a show or would you take off the mask? Would you wonder about the nature of ideological existence? If your life is dependent on a thought, if you think you have to be a certain thought your whole life, the thing is, you're eventually going to be pushed off the Iron Throne. Wanting things in this life too much, not that you shouldn't want anything, you should just be efficient. Wanting something in regards to an obsessive attachment, for example, people who are afraid of getting old, or people who are afraid of death. In some sense, we cannot ignore how the world moves. We are on the shoulder of a giant, and the giant walks in such a way. But for me, once the games of the personal reality have been played enough, literally you have lived enough for yourself, that's when you wonder about what else is there lived for, and in some sense a sort of collective intelligence finds you. It finds you once you have had enough. It's as if, like, your life will not change until you have that moment where you're like, enough. There's this kind of very playful saying that says, only those people need to be saved who want to save the world. They need to be saved from themselves, from their sense of self. Because the world you see at first is not the world you see. For me, it was a very humbling experience. Literally, like a samurai, I had to put down the weapons of my intellect. The intellect can be sharpened. You can, and especially when, and so the youth can automatically, after many years, begin to see the flaws of the future generations. It's always been like this. The reason there's respect is because human beings are moving at different speeds. You know, it's like the rabbit looks at the turtle, and instead of being like, yo turtle, let's race, I know I'm gonna win, like instead of having that having that mentality, the in some sense the rabbit or hare or whatever like goes beside the turtle, as the story would this ancient story says. I'll tell you the story in a second. But I gotta finish this point. It's kind of like the fast learning to honor the slow, and the slow learning to honor the fast. And in that space, necessarily not action must occur. You see, when you think things have to always go somewhere, you will not. It's as if like you're baking a cake, but because you can't wait for the cake to be baked, you stop baking that cake and you start baking a new cake. You know. Now I'm not a baker. You know. But the notion simply is of what kind of ideology streams you activate throughout the day. Eventually, you will live life in such a robotic way, and there's nothing wrong with that. All those people say fake it till you make it. I mean, I don't think that's possible. I don't think a human being can fake a first attempt. You see, it's as if we think success to be there in an instant, then we avoid the journey. But once we see the journey is here, there is a value. For example, there's something that kind of has been keeping my energy levels and maintaining my health throughout this whole lifetime. And it's a field. It has to do with a sort of acknowledgement of the intelligence of the universal sector. And the way it is, what it is in some sense, a part of me has acknowledged that the world is here, but a part of me has also acknowledged that I am here. And the fact that the sense of I amness is here, once you realize, oh my God, after billions of years, this science project called humanity has evolved to this capacity. You know, it's very hard to hate yourself when you're the product of 4 billion years of evolution. Yeah. And what I'm trying to get to is that you begin to see life as an opportunity. The easiest way to miss an opportunity is by not seeing one there. Humility is very important. Humility is a very crucial element when it comes to uh, having your face, in some sense. It's like you're getting rid of the artificial aspects of your intelligence simply because you were spoon-fed them since childhood and you never wondered about them. There is a lot of the mind unexplored. Carl Jung has this quote where he says, "Unless you make the unconscious conscious, it will dictate your life, and you will call it fate." Something like that. It will run your life, and you will call it fate. So what that is that Mr. Within is saying the educational systems don't even know about this to even acknowledge it, or they know about it but don't care for it. It's as if the scientific method has sabotaged all the other ways of knowing that the educational system could in some sense craft. You see, the fact is that the educational system could not tell the child about their mind, because if the child truly understood the nature of their mind, they would have a totally different comprehension of education. For them, life wouldn't be about learning things. They would no longer see teachers. They would in some sense see their moment of being as the teacher. They will learn from their experience rather than push that to the side and learn from something else. Even though I speak about humility, but the reason is because it's a sort of freedom. You have to attain a sort of freedom, and then this freedom dictates your speed. Right now, think of it this way. Somebody has a huge backpack with like 20 heavy books in it, right? And the person has to run somewhere, okay? The person is running to the other, like somewhere. Now, the person that is running, if they don't ask themselves why those books are necessary, they will be carrying weight. That's the thing. That's why you got to make the unconscious conscious by wondering about the nature of yourself, which, primarily it appears as awareness, as simple, pristine, pure awareness. Then as you move, if you sit still and silent, something unique happens to the mind. It's kind of like the same thing that happens in chess when certain chess students want to learn how to play. They like a way of getting good at chess is playing against yourself. Now some people will be like, how can you play chess with yourself? That's so ridiculous. But I'll tell you, it can be done. It can be done because there's forgetfulness. That means the person makes a move, the best move they can on this side, on the black side of the chess, with the chess pieces, and then they switch the thing, and they close their eyes, and after a couple seconds that go by, they open their eyes and they assume that they're the white pieces, and they try to make the best move. In some sense, eventually, as you do this, and the memory forgets, not that it forgets, but it's kind of like the shores of an ocean alongside a beach, as if whatever you write on the beach, it will in some sense get washed. I find that there's two ways that a human being can reach for truth. One sort of reach has to do with your physical existence, literally what your body can do, in what ways that the body can maintain itself. The other reach has to do with the inner reality. It's kind of like you move your hands in front of your eyes, but if you were to move something behind your eyes, you see the movement has to do with the direction of attention upon image. So right now I could tell you, um, imagine in your backyard there's a canoe kind of just floating in the air very slowly, you know like you can imagine that, but you see that image, even though you visualize it there to be, you can see how it's there in your backyard because you visualized it. At the same time, the image is not there. So the way the mind's kind of projections appear, it's as if they're in an invisible room, but their design is accessible internally. Now the internal external is a very complex thing to speak about because this life is too dynamic for a sort of model to contain all, you know? I guess the way to kind of experience about the dynamic kind of movements of the mind is that when the physical body goes into stillness, the attention of the moment goes internally. If the physical body is moving, your mind is, but there is a sort of precision and attention. It's as if the thoughts have a sort of silence. Now, I'm not talking about runners who are jogging in a certain way. I'm talking about intense, intention-oriented activity, athletics, in the sense that the person has to, like, for example, do a backflip. And in the middle of that backflip, their attention is, in some sense, as if their body's movement and intensity is taking more of the attention. But when the physical body is still and silent, which is kind of the implication of meditative practices, they're all kind of like a pond, the ripples of a pond settling. For me, it's the world is a strange is a strange place at first. This stranger makes you not want to get involved with it. Kind of the external reality sometimes can be so overwhelming that the person, because they have future kind of expectations and values, they kind of don't engage with it. But the thing is, I consider society and civilization to be a sort of brain for the species. So what I feel is that different people, like the back in the day, the blacksmith, the carpenter, the various people who lived in a village or a town, they were like the sides of the brain. As if this part of the brain is meant for this activity and that part is meant for that activity, and pretty much what we find in civilization to be humans, like 8 billion plus human beings engaged with so many kinds of activities. So these activities all imply states of being, and all a majority of them imply worlds, right? So the thing is, for me, I'm like, if I wanted to get access to 8 billion thoughts, 8 billion views of Earth, how could I do that? And I see it's just all human beings, and how much the values behind our eyes can, in some sense, be efficiently shared with the world in front of our eyes. The issue, the issue I have with the educational system is that it's accepted the world too soon and it's teaching it, simply said. It's making it very complex for people who care for knowledge to actually attain it. Imagine right now, okay, this species of ours was under attack by some like Independence Day movie kind of situation where an alien species is attacking us, okay? This alien species that is attacking us, imagine we're in this long war, like 200-year war on the surface of the planet between Earth and these not so evolved aliens, you know, but they're still aliens. we're going to see immediately the government would come and say, holy shit, we can't all be separate nations because the species is under attack. So immediately world peace is assumed. Human beings will care for one another more than an alien attacking them, for example, in that situation. So there's an integrative humanity. Suddenly all humanity has been in one category, as if people don't have time to be in nations. They're at war. The species is at war. Now, the second thing is that the generals, the commanders of, in some sense, humanity's retaliation against its extraterrestrial extinction, so in that situation, what the commanders of that sort of humanity in that setting, what they would do is they would run to the educational system and they would be like, all education is free, and we advise people to run and like to the educational system, and in some sense trying to find ways that we can combat this. Do you see? It's as if you don't, a true commander does not just liberate the able, but also those that are not able. You see, it's as if a person cannot physically fight, their mind can still be mighty, give them something to do. If the person physically can only do something, their mind is more aligned to following a community or instruction. You see, the thing was, the intelligence, um, how would I say it? It's like, you gotta want to live your life, or eventually sort of programs will come and take it from you. Not that they will take it from you, I mean, that sounds too intense, but the thing is that become aware of how you're being a conscious moment. This simple presence is not something you got to be in all the time. It's just an implication that rather than the individual trying to get to some secret place, the world's secrets are revealed. The nature of the whole simulation is kind of studied. So the educational system would not only not have a cost to it, but is encouraging loads of people, because the more we know, the more we can have attempts at the hardest questions that kind of, in some sense, challenge our species. And for me, I don't believe, I think the thing is, like, through my own inner kind of explorations, if there is ever a time human beings will communicate with extraterrestrial beings, they will not be extraterrestrial beings. We will remember, like, the thing is, like, it's a sort of co-creation. There's a story, the Zen story, which is very significant. This man is sitting on this grassland, and he's sitting in meditation in the lotus pose. And as he's sitting there, he suddenly gets a profound insight. He suddenly realizes the world is the light in his eyes. He realizes something about the nature of reality. As this person realizes the world is his eyes, in some sense, there is an incredible kind of, like, an explosion goes off in a subtler dimension. Suddenly, as the Zen story goes, there is a minion, a dark minion, some creature of mischief. And this creature of mischief, in a confusion, you can say, creature of confusion. And so this dark minion, in some sense, is looking at this man who's gotten enlightened in another dimension, and and this dark minion just gets scared. He freaks out. He's like, they're realizing the truth. Human beings are realizing the truth, and he runs to the Dark Lord and says, Dark Lord, and there's a Dark Lord in the story. This is Zen's story, I read it online. And so the Dark Lord suddenly looks at this dark minion that's been, he's like, Dark minion's like, what, Dark Lord, this dude just understood something about reality. What do we do? He's understanding the truth to the nature of the world, the simulation. That look at, and this is the moral of the story. There's the response that the Dark Lord gives. It's kind of insane. The Dark Lord says, don't worry about it, because whatever this being realizes about the true nature of reality, he will make a belief out of it, and he will lose the passage. He will no longer breaks up matter into subjects. So for me, I'm like, what if the language is the limitation? And this is a chaotic question. Right now, I don't expect the listener to be like, whoa, like this is chaotic, a very chaotic question, because it's the implication that the design of the language suggests the limit of the world in the attention of that being. When life is considered multidimensional, it means you never react too harsh to it based on the data of one dimension. What that means is this person's so angry, he feels like like the person he's angry at, he feels that person wronged them, but everybody in the room knows that the person who the guy's angry at wasn't the person who did the thing, right? And it's this situation where it's an anger. The anger brings with itself the conviction of the limited data. The person's convinced that what they see is the only thing they see, so that person is in the wrong, and so they have to become the judgment day of the moment. And so savageness, I mean, it's kind of interesting when you see it. Honestly, chaos is kind of, when chaotic things happen, there's a sort of excitement to it, but that excitement, it gets boring. Imagine too much chaos repeating. Like, we'll be like, okay, what is this? What is this constant lack of order? So we will be pulled towards order, and it could be vice versa too. Again, bringing up the kind of debates on in regards to, is a utopia really the best solution? Because a utopia can be boring if the person doesn't have problems in their life. One of the most profound things that I've heard is that somebody went up to someone, he's like, man, I got problems in my life, what do I do? And that person's like, you don't have enough problems, you need to get more problems, because when you get bigger problems, the smaller problems don't bother you. Have you noticed that? And it's the same in the religious context, is the opposite. It's like when you have a bigger answer, the smaller answers don't bother you. When you have accepted a sort of a finalization of how the world is kept, the other, like, in some way it gives you strength, but in another angle, in some sense, it takes away the vastness of your eyes. It's like the child's eyes open. The child gets sculpted by its ecosystem and its free will, and then finds itself in a moment where it's like, okay, everything will, in some sense, dismantle, and death is coming. We all acknowledge this. That means, like, yeah, I don't have children, but if I had, they ask me what death is, I'm like, it's something that every human being goes through. Don't think you're just special because you die and you have a sort of belief. Death is kind of like, I remember acknowledging death when I was 10 years old, and I was visiting Iran for the summer. I live in Canada, Toronto, and I was visiting Iran, and when me and my brother, 10 years old, in the backyard of my maternal grandmother's house, suddenly we hear the news. A news comes that in some sense my grandfather on the paternal side has passed away. I remember being at the funeral, and everybody was crying, and in Iran they have a very unique tradition. The sons put the father's corpse, sons or the family members and crucial family members, they put the corpse of the father into the grave, and it's not in a casket in Iran. It's like a bit more old school than casket. And so people are put underneath the earth, the corpses of people, and it was in this graveyard, kind of in a mosque area in Iran. And I remember I was there, And the gravestones were just on the ground. They weren't kind of like vertical, how we find in Western countries. And so I remember walking past these gravestones, but the gravestones had, many of them had pictures of the person's face somehow engraved in the stone, which was unique. But anyways, I remember being 10 years old, and I started crying, and then my tears stopped. It was as if the tears were becoming unauthentic because I hadn't seen my grandfather that much. I had very few memories of him. I never got to really know him before he passed. I was walking by the tombstones on the ground, and I remembered suddenly a moment where there was a tree in my backyard, and I remembered the leaves of it had fell on my balcony, the dry leaves. And so it was a moment where just that image of the dry leaf I suddenly realized the death of my grandfather was the process of nature. And then it was very strange. It's as if my grieving became into a resolution. It's very fascinating. Once something leaves the moment which the person has been acquainted with for a while, assumes like it's a pillar, like someone who's in your life, who in some sense is there, but you don't acknowledge. Eventually, you're going, like, when that person leaves, you feel like that person's only. It's like only your mind can see the memories of them. And that's why I feel that regardless, you always, if you want to intellectually approach life, you will be a fool. Not that it's foolish what you're doing. It's not that the intellect is for the fool. But I'm saying it's just that it moves in a way where after you have lived, it's as if the person who opens its eyes and the person who closes their eyes, they're not the same person. It's as if the mind is showing kind of like the movement of the soul in the body as experience. And the mind, for at least for Mr. Within, is a field. At its core, it's a field. I have theorized a sort of, I call it wave from the edge of the universe theory. And it's this notion that pretty much at the edge of this universe, there are waves. There are waves being thrown. The mind is how the biological body is hit by that wave. It's hit by that wave. It's kind of like the human consciousness is an infusion, an intersection of sound and light, which emerges as a materialistic design. It's as if the little samurai boy ran to his samurai father, and it's like, "Father, when we honor our ancestors, who are we honoring?" And the father kind of took took the kid and showed like the pictures and the ashes of the various great samurai of the lineage and ancestors. And then the son was like, "Who did our ancestors, those early ancestors, worship?" And eventually it came down to a point the kid kept on asking, where the father's like, "Okay, they were honoring energy. Okay, we all came from some sort of energy." Like the thing became too existential, you know? And so that's the thing. You might. And efficiency must be attempted by all civilizations. It's just in the nature. We seek to see what the better would look like. There's this poet by the name of Hafez. He says, the words you speak become the house you live in. But when Mr. Within says, you're not your thoughts, you're not the words that you can just throw out in one moment. You simply see there's known aspects to your intelligence and unknown aspects to your intelligence, and if the known aspects of your intelligence define the whole attention, the unknown will never be explored. And it's not something that can have instruction, and it's not something that it's safe. It's kind of like a battlefield. When you wonder about the nature of the true core of reality, how all of this is here, it's as if science is ignoring the metaphysical, because if it acknowledges it, it will dismantle its axioms. Sometimes you got to be careful who your enemy is, because then it will define you. Sometimes the people who are around you, they don't just define themselves, they define also those they are around. And I am tired. I am tired of a civilization uh, being driven, like literally people's minds, it's ideologies moving in their minds, language is moving, literally like the Matrix. And like I think I eventually figured out what those codes on the Matrix window were, what they truly were. They were the thoughts that were occurring in that moment. It was as if the language moving through the mind of the person is defining the range and scope of their action. Like if you don't know there's a better pizza place, you will not go to that pizza place. You see what I mean? And so that's when the reverence for an external worship and the reverence for even a subjective ideal worship, you stop worshiping phenomena. You just abide as it. You find a sort of simplicity that frees you from all complexity. This simplicity is kind of reverse engineering back through your memory and eventually realizing how you were designed as a human. As you reverse engineer to the core of the core is a moment prior to the child learning language, but the child being conscious of existence. So experience, which is simply being communicated through language, as you go deeper, reverse engineering, you walk back through the tunnel of your conscious existence, not your conscious memory. As you kind of tunnel through that memory field, you eventually tap into the nature of the moment. It's kind of very chaotic because right now I can think of the past, but am I really thinking of the past when I'm in a totally different moment? Does this new moment even allow me to see the past the same way as I experienced it? So in some sense, we see the past as past. And the present is its own gift. I am tired of ideal worship. It's just boring. It's so boring every day following just certain ideology. Eventually you want to create it. Like the person who's just using the technology eventually becomes a creator of technology. But after you create the technology, eventually you see it's the nature of it's nature's movement. And I find this whole life is a battle of acceptance. The person cannot accept how the world moves, so they have other motives, and based on the unnaturalness of the motive comes the karmic, uh, effect. Because people's nature must be taken into consideration. This is why Lao Tzu, in some sense, says, once the leader's task is done, the people would say we did it ourselves. What that means is the only way a leader can exist is if they are seeing the whole. That was pretty much what defined war. You see, war back in the day, it had, like, if you read Sun Tzu's Art of War, you begin to see a totally different, you begin to see the strategic dimensions to war. And the strategic dimensions was whoever had the higher ground, which internally meant whichever kingdom knew more. Do you see? So sometimes the people around you who you may feel they're succeeding, their success is not based on their unique talent all the time. It's based on what they're seeing and the values they're acknowledging. For me, fear, I mean, there has definitely been moments where there has been fear. But the way I comprehend fear is that it's just a distraction. It's a distraction from the confrontation of the real thing. It's kind of like surrender. Fear is a surrender. It's surrender to a thought in the middle of an experience. I want to share something that I have never mentioned in any of these talks. And I gotta just hold on, guys. I gotta do something before. Oh, okay. There's a story I wanted to share about something I don't share often. It's this I'm working on this science fiction novel. It is called The Messenger of Giants. It's unpublished for now. In this, it's I've built a very complex universe. I've kind of tried to allow all sorts of multidimensional landscapes to exist. And so, anyways, there's a character in this story, and the story is not something. It's like pretty much I'm just explaining what's happening in different parallel realities of the Earth in the year 5025. And pretty much there's a chapter in where it's dedicated. The chapter is titled "The Andromedan Pilot," and for those people who don't know what Andromeda is our neighboring galaxy, which in like I don't know what is it, like 3 trillion years, 4 trillion, I don't know how long. Like we will in some sense be in the middle of it, like the middle of the Milky Way would be in the middle of the Andromeda galaxy. They would cross over in some sense. Anyways, okay. The story is that in this sci-fi novel I've written, I don't remember which parallel reality it is. There's 9 parallel realities. Uh, anyways, in this science fiction novel, what's happening in this chapter is pretty much the Andromedans are, in my book, they are the most enlightened species, extraterrestrial species. They're just superior in comprehension, like the way they've understood the universe surpasses the way all other beings have. And the story is there's this Andromedan pilot, and this Andromedan pilot is in their unique kind of advanced civilization spacecraft, and the Andromedan species is a very wise and peaceful species, you know? It is the archetype of the peaceful galactic entity. Anyways, there's this kind of crew, this flight crew, and the Andromedan pilot. They're not a fighting unit. This is not like a fighting vehicle, right? They're just passing, and this is a pilot of a cargo, the Andromedan pilot. And he's not the pilot of a cargo. I'm not going to say it like the way we think, like he's just moving things. He's a very important character. Also, you know, in his own, in the Andromeda sector and beyond. Anyways, the Andromedan pilot is the story, and so there's this evil kind of species, alien species, that has decided to kind of, in a fascist way, conquer the universe. This species, they're called the Darkons, Darkhans. And the Darkons, they're kind of like these insects, and when they appear, if they were to kind of invade a planet, suddenly from the sky you'd see spirals of smog and electricity, you know. But anyways, this is in space, and so the Andromedan pilot, the ship of the Andromedan, these Andromedan beings, is kind of there, and what happens is the Darkon fleet suddenly attacks this Andromedan pilot's crew, their ship, the plane of this Andromedan pilot. And so what happens is that they become into a war, into like this confrontation, and there's this thing the Andromedan galaxy knows. The Darkons have this weapon that if this weapon is shot at any being, it destroys their soul. What that means is it's kind of a soul destroyer kind of weapon. And this weapon, if the being doesn't go out of their body instantly, they don't jump out of their body, you know, in some sense, their soul will be eradicated out of existence completely, right? So in this context, is this novel I've written is there's many metaphysical structures, okay, in place. But anyways, so the situation is this Andromedan pilot is the only being in that ship, the pilot, right, who manages to get his soul out of his body right before this Darkon explosion occurs. And the moment the guy gets the Andromedan pilot gets his soul out of the body, he's near Earth's kind of atmosphere. And what happens is he suddenly comes into an incarnation as a person. And in actuality, how the chapter begins is you begin to see this man who has his hand on this kind of like aircraft, kind of, what do you call it? Like this kind of like a debris from the ship of the Andromedan, the pilot, right? But this kid is a totally human kid, and he's just touching this thing as if he's touching the gravestone of all his fallen comrades, and he's just remembering it. And the whole story is this Andromedan pilot is this very important person needed in the Andromeda galaxy, right? And he's been kind of lost in Earth in an incarnation cycle in Earth. And so there's a very unique story of how the Andromedan galaxy, they have a sort of unique royalty, and it's like the royalty, the Andromedan pilot is one of their kind of royalty. And in some sense, it's the notion of the Andromedan galaxy eventually, and as the book unfolds, kind of charging at Earth, you know, not to fight it, but to recover this. At the same time, the Darkons are conquering Earth. You know, as the story goes, they suddenly see there's this parallel reality the human beings didn't know about, which the Darkons have somehow entered and are using this advanced technology to take over the 8 other parallel realities, you know, of the Earth. And it's a very unique story, you know. But the notion I wanted to share of the Andromedan pilot and the fact that he came into an incarnation cycle on Earth, but when he came as an incarnation cycle on Earth, since his childhood, he retained all his memories. So in the whole book, you begin to see he's like this human being who has all the memories of what happened and how he's here, as if his memory wasn't kind of dismissed by the karmic fields of the Earth. And so even in this science fiction novel I write, it's very unique because there's oversouls to the sectors of space. Just like how somebody can see a spirit, like for example in a tree, or in some sense an animal running, this is the same way of seeing a spirit, an oversoul, kind of in like a chunk of space, you know, of outer space, you know. And that's kind of, I find, a very unique thing to acknowledge. The world is being kept by not only how we remember it, but how we are generating it. It's too active to just purely be inactive, and there are moments of inactivity which makes you feel, in some sense, you are not part of that, what is active. The wings of the mind must open. It only occurs when you value your intelligence. You see? If you don't value your intelligence, you survive ignorantly, which means you're trying to copy paste the best possible thing rather than actually sitting down and studying your life, which is something only your eyes can do because nobody else has your eyes. These words, the greatest thing they can be is a mirror. I have no idea how people are hearing what I'm saying, for example. But I have an understanding that it's as if whatever they hear, it's their experiences kind of echoing back at them, reflecting back at them. So guys, I'm going to conclude the talk. Thanks for tuning in, but I've decided to just try this out. You know, for the next 10 minutes, I'm just gonna keep it open for Q&A, okay? Because it took it too long to get here, and for us to just be careless, you know. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Much blessings and always.